All right, so now that we have talked a good amount about olfaction, let's jump into gustation. This will actually be pretty short and sweet. I don't think it will come as a galloping shock to any of you to learn that taste starts with the tongue. That is overwhelmingly the primary sensory organ when it comes to taste. It turns out it's not the only bit. You actually do have some taste receptors. Someone recently told me that you have taste receptors. You know that thing that dangles in the back of your throat, the uvula? Apparently you have some taste receptors there. I didn't know that. I should learn more about that. But on your tongue, you have these things that are called taste buds, okay? So you have these little porous entities where you have these little receptors right on the surface of the tongue. So this, these pinkish cells here are are the tongue itself. And you have these buds in which these buds all are going to have these little receptors that are going to reach out into the world and grab little things that you eat, and they will allow you to taste them. Now, one thing I want to stress is that there are different taste cells within one bud. It's not like one taste bud only has one type of cell or one cell only. It has multiple cells, and it will even have multiple types of receptor type cells, okay? And there are effectively, as you've probably heard, 5 of them. There are thought to be 5 basic tastes, which are sweet, salty, sour, umami, which I still always struggle to kind of figure out how to like accurately describe umami. Maybe because I don't eat enough mushrooms, I don't know. And bitter, okay? Now, a thing that I think I mentioned, oh geez, God, it might've been on the very first day actually, was about the taste map myth. I might've mentioned this to some of you, I can't remember. Now, the taste map myth is this idea that there are different parts of your tongue that correspond to different tastes, that you can only taste sweet things on the tip of your tongue, bitter things on the back of your tongue, salty things on the back side of it, and so on and so forth, okay? So how could you just prove this very fast and very easily? What you would want to do, for example, is put something bitter on the tip of your tongue, put something salty on the tip of your tongue. If you're ever so inclined, if you want to disprove the taste map myth, or if ever anyone ever challenges you on it, tell them to put some salt on their palm, lick it real quick, and then boom, they're going to just have disproved it immediately, okay? The one thing I will say, though, is that there is a slight bit of truth to it, okay? Not entirely, and very subtle even. I don't even know if it's truth to the myth, or just, I can kind of see where this idea sort of came from if I squint hard enough, because there are higher sensitivities to different tastes on different parts of your tongue. So it's not as if you can taste sweet uniformly across the tongue in the same degree, or bitterness uniformly across the tongue in the same degree. There are hot spots, as it were. So here is a plot kind of demonstrating that. So here is your mouth and your tongue. Here's a close-up of some taste buds, but let's focus on this data down here, okay? So this data down here is showing you the relative activation, that's what taste strength is, of these different types of receptors in response to salty, sweet, sour, bitter. For some reason here they didn't do umami, I'm not sure why. And they're looking at the responses in 3 different parts of your tongue: the fungiform papillae, the foliate papillae, and the circumvallate papillae. And so what you can just see from this data down here, okay, on the vertical axis, is the fact that these little bars, for example, here, let's look at this one. I think this is the biggest effect size in the circumvallate papillae. They're not uniform, okay? It actually turns out in this case that bitter is a little stronger and more receptive back here in the back of the tongue than other things. And when you're thinking about the taste map myth, maybe that's where this idea came of bitterness, where some people are like, oh, okay, if it turns out that that's where it's the strongest, that's what somehow through telephone people got the idea that it was only back there. That you can also see in a situation, though, is a little confusing, that sort of logic, though, because by that logic, you would think that people would have assumed that salty things, for example, are on the tip of your tongue, because salty is actually processed the most when it's in the tip of the tongue. But if you go back to the taste map myth, you could see that people thought it was sweet there. So again, when I say that there is a slight validity to it, it's a pretty slight validity of it itself. But there are some variations in the sensitivity across your tongue for sure. Okay, so what determines how something tastes? Now, you think it would just be the cell activity on the tongue, right? And for a large degree, it obviously is. The pattern of activity on your tongue, much like the pattern of activity in your receptors of your nose, the pattern of activity in your visual cortex, are all going to determine how something smells, how something looks, how something tastes, et cetera, okay? I don't want you to get the impression that I'm saying something different. Obviously, the cell activity on your tongue matters a lot. But it actually turns out, and this is my favorite, so much of taste is also smell, okay? And remember, I was saying when you lose your sense of smell and when you're anosmic, a big part of it also will be that you lose a huge part of your taste as well. And the reason for that is thought to be this thing that is called retronasal olfaction, okay? So it turns out that there's actually two different ways that something can get into your sinus cavity. So one is orthonasal olfaction. This is where something goes in through your nose. But if you close your nose off, okay, you actually can still get things into your nasal cavity through retronasal olfaction. It'll go up basically through the back of the throat. And it turns out that this combination of these things working together, the combination of taste and smells kind of entering your system all at the same time, will combine to give you the nice sense of taste that you enjoy. So the best way that you could possibly demonstrate this is with Dorito nacho cheese chips. Were this a normal semester, what I always do on this particular day is I bring like 40 little bags of Doritos nacho cheese chips and I hand them out to everyone. And what I tell you to do is close your nose, take the nacho cheese chips, eat them, okay? Don't swallow them. Take a couple bites, get your tongue nice and covered in the chips. And think about how tasty they are. And everyone will be like, yeah, I can kind of taste cheese, but it's pretty muted. And then I would say, let go, open your mouth, breathe in and out a few times. And everyone kind of always laughs because it's like, wow, a wave of delicious cheesiness just came in and just overwhelmed my taste buds. So it actually turns out that a lot of the way we are able to infer how something tastes is contributing from the pattern of activity that's on your tongue. But actually a big part of it is also coming from the fact that your taste buds and your olfactory system work together and combine together actually in the brain to make this experience of taste. Now, most people, when they do this thing where they cover their nose up, they ask, is that the experience of what it's like to be anosmic? Not really, because of the fact that you still have retronasal olfaction. So even though you might plug your nose while you're eating the Doritos, some of the air can still get into your nasal cavity that can also actually help you have the sense of smell. So actually, it does a pretty good job of approximating it, but it's actually worse if you're anosmic, because if you're anosmic, it's almost like this system up here is not working, so you won't get either orthonasal or retronasal olfaction. So that's actually not the only thing that can determine how something tastes. So another thing that can help determine how things taste are also referred to as context effects. And so it actually turns out that top-down knowledge sometimes and how you perceive and process something independent of on your tongue will play a role in how something tastes. So this is one of my favorite little experiments. This is just a good old-fashioned psychology experiment, where what they would do is they would give you a liquid and you would have to say what flavor it was, okay? And so basically you'd have to guess, is it a cherry, an orange, or a lime flavored liquid? And you'd give, you'd have 1 out of 3 options, so this is how accurate you're getting it. And so, over here you've got cherry, then you've got orange, then you've got lime. But the experimenters are like, hey, we did something kind of trippy. We also put some dye in those liquids so that they might be their corresponding color, but they might not be. So you might get cherry flavored that's red. You also might get cherry flavored that's green, or lime flavored that's orange, okay? So basically people are told from the get-go, you've got these three options, but we're artificially color coding them. And they do their due diligence. They make sure that like the dye doesn't change the taste of it. If you cover people's eyes, they can't really tell the difference between red cherry, orange cherry, green cherry. But it turns out that people seem to be heavily influenced by the beverage color. So if you give people red cherry, they're way more likely to accurately identify it as being cherry flavored than if it's green cherry. If you give people orange, people are much more likely to say it's orange flavored when it's the right color than when it's the wrong color. And then lastly with lime, okay? It's much easier to identify the true beverage flavor when the color matches it correctly, again, because the context effects. I've done little things like this for fun at lab parties. If you go to grad school and you're in a neuroscience lab, instead of, playing normal games on a Friday night, you sometimes try to replicate basic experiments. And we tried this one time. And it's really actually quite powerful, because even though it's happening, you just really can't help but be super influenced by the color of it. Actually, and then the reading you're going to have to do for our discussion next week is actually about marketing modulating the representations of taste and pleasantness. Basically, if you're told that a bottle of wine is $10 versus if you're told a bottle of wine is $50, even if it's the same exact wine, people will say that they taste very different, and you can actually look at people's behavioral responses, their neural responses, and so that's what we're going to be reading about. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit very quickly about the gustatory pathway. So you have these taste receptor cells that are on your tongue, which obviously will then project to your brain. And again, as we've talked about before, they will project to your brain through the thalamus, and then they will go into the taste parts of your brain. I don't really understand this plot because this plot is not exactly right. It is for some reason saying that gustatory cortex is on the outer part of is like that, like on the super outer part of the brain right there. But what I've always learned is actually that primary gustatory cortex is more inside the brain there, not on the outer side there. But I still like this diagram because while this one I think here has a good accurate representation of where that primary cortex is, I like that this one shows you the lines from whatchamacallit, the tongue to the solitary tract to the thalamus and so on and so forth. And then just to be consistent, because we've been talking about projection sides, I do want to emphasize that the tongue, like the nose, will project to the ipsilateral side. So ipsilateral just means the same side, contralateral means the opposite. So in this case here, you could actually see that in here, the left side of the tongue on this case will project to the left side of gustatory cortex, or in the left, or sorry, the gustatory cortex in the left hemisphere, whereas the right side would project to the gustatory cortex on the right side. So in this case, olfaction and gustation are actually united by the fact that they both have this sort of ipsilateral projection, whereas things like vision has something very different, and audition does as well, and so forth. Okay, so I just wanted to put this plot up one last time because actually now we are done talking about all the major sensory domains of the cerebral cortex. We're now going to move beyond basic sensation, and we're going to start talking about things like memory and language and navigation and so on and so forth. But now that we have gone through these systems, you all have a really good fundamental understanding of cognitive processing in the brain, and sensory neuroscience really is the foundational aspect of cognitive neuroscience. So open any textbook and you'll see a lot of it dedicated to this stuff. So I thought we'd spend a good amount of time talking about it. Please be thinking about questions you've got on any of this stuff. I guess I should have also put audition in here because we didn't just talk about audition or olfaction gustation. We also talked about audition. Think about that. That wraps it up for this week. I will see you all in class. All right, take it easy. Talk to you all soon.